Hi, this is Eric Paglia on location in Tromsø, Norway for the Arctic Frontiers Conference, where we're recording some special episodes of the Polar Geopolitics podcast. And I'm extraordinarily happy and pleased to be able to welcome for the podcast two real senior leaders of Greenland, been with Greenlandic politics and a lot of the societal issues over the past decades, both attending the conference here in Tromsø. And at a very opportune time to talk about the current state of Greenland, both in terms of its internal relations inside of the Kingdom of Denmark, and also external relations with the United States, the European Union, and so forth. So welcoming to the podcast, we have Aaja Chemnitz, member of the Danish Parliament and one of Greenland's two representatives in the Folketing, and Dr. Sara Olsvig, chair of the Inuit Circumpolar Council, formerly a Greenlandic politician, and formerly a minister in the government of Greenland. So Sara and Aaja, thank you very much for joining us here on the Polar Geopolitics podcast, making time in your busy schedules here at Arctic Frontiers. Very happy to have you here. So I thought I'd start by, of course, everything that's going on right now. You've been very much in the global spotlight the past month and even the past year. I want to go back to 2024, not that long ago, and right before this crisis really kicked into motion, Greenland published its foreign security and defense strategy. It's called Greenland in the World. Nothing about us without us. And that latter part of it, nothing about us without us, that's been a slogan that Greenland's been using for some time now. So instead of just talking about the strategy as a strategy itself and the wording of the strategy, I want to talk about that statement of purpose, nothing about us without us. How has that helped guide you through this current crisis, the last year and the last month?
Actually, nothing about us without us was something I brought into politics. So I was a national spokesperson for children, and I was saying nothing about us without us in order to make sure that, people understood the power shift that needs to be done. And I think, with no relation to that, I think it's also very important in the relationship between Greenland and Denmark. Greenland representing ourselves and having a seat at the table is just the core of what should be done in the relationship between Greenland and Denmark, but also in relation to any other country.
Yes, and I think that the fact that Kalaallit Greenland and Naalakkersuisut, the government, issued the nation's own strategy on those areas is falling very well in line with the decades and decades of Inuit governance taking place in the Arctic, determining our own future as an indigenous people living across state borders. We represent in our organization the Inuit Circumpolar Council, both Inuit in Kalaallit Greenland, Canada, Alaska, and Chukotka, Russia. And for the almost 50 years of ICC's existence, that's exactly been what it's about, to determine our own policies and strategies to ensure that policymaking in the Arctic that we have for a long time seen happening without us becomes, policymaking with us at the table. So on a broader scale, also in an international scale, this is something that Inuit have really been pushing for and living through governing our own region for millennia, and now in partnership with states for a long, long time. So I see the fact that Kalaallit Greenland has its own strategy as an important but also natural part of exercising self-determination.
What's the state of self-determination in the other Inuit communities in Canada and the United States? Have they looked upon what's happening in the past year in Greenland? How do they see this as affecting them in their rights for self-determination?
We are all affected as Inuit, and I am that's confirmed, being confirmed for me again here as we meet in Tromsø, also with Inuit from Alaska and Canada. For the Inuit Circumpolar Council, we issued a statement a year ago when sort of this last round of expressed interest from the U.S. to Kalaallit was at its height. And there we had a few important principles and statements that we wanted to share with the world. Firstly, that there's simply no such thing as a better colonizer. And we said that, and we continue to say that because we have deep respect for each of the arrangements we have across these different nation states with the governments, with the states, but also recognizing that you cannot really compare colonization. No colonization is good, and we are all living on in a situation and in a reality that carries with it consequences that came from colonization, but we've also persevered those changes that came with the construct of states, which we predate as indigenous peoples of the Arctic. And therefore it's important for us to be clear that for Inuit we have rejected to be pitted against each other, which at some points in this debate has also been something we've seen, and also made sure that we lift each other up instead of arguing or debating which colonizer was best or would be best to live under. So this is, I think, a core issue that really has come to light also in the past year.
I usually say to our Arctic friends, our security is also your security. I think the solidarity between us is very important, and I think it's been one of the greatest tests of Greenland and our society, but also one of the greatest tests for the relationship between Greenland and Denmark, but also between Greenland and our allies. And therefore I think it's going to be very important for us to stand as fully united as we can in this situation, and also to understand that there's a situation which is a crisis right now. That's the way I see it. And I think it's too early to lower our shoulders and put our guards down. And we know, of course, strengthening defense in the Arctic is something that we also need to discuss, but we also need to do it in a manner where we're actually respecting the people living in the Arctic. And we need to make sure when we're putting so much money on defense and quite little on diplomacy, and I think that's one point to make in its own, that we also need to make sure that we strengthen the societies in the Arctic, because we have more or less some of the same living conditions. We see some of the same mega trends, for example, urbanization. We also see, the fact that we have more elders and not that many in the workforce. So making the Arctic society as robust as possible, as strong as possible, and keep building on, the fight that we have done for centuries and we will keep fighting for, which is the right to self-determination, is very important for us.
I mean, you mentioned this military buildup that's taking place in the midst of this crisis, sending all these troops to Greenland, whether it's from Denmark and from other European countries. How is that being received in Greenland? Is that something that's being welcomed? Is that something they are seeing with some sort of concern? Do they think it's exaggerated? How does, in terms of the future, is making Greenland more militarized, let's say, is that something that the local population welcomes, or are they concerned about this?
I think we're seeing different reactions. I think in this current situation, I think more people understand that we need to make sure that that we're defended. But I think it's also important to say that Greenland don't have a defense history. We haven't had our sisters and brothers or our parents, for example, who have served in the military. So therefore, a lot of people don't necessarily have the kind of experience in their own family. And it was usually, the Danes that came as a defense in Greenland. And that's why I think it's very important to make sure that the defense interests in Greenland and also the Greenlandic people's interest are being interlinked and really respected. And it might take a little more time, but that's why I think engagement with the local population is so important when we talk about defense in the Arctic. And I think, just looking into whether the defense agreement should be renewed, it's also very important to have as many discussions and debates with the local population in order to make sure that they really feel that they're part of the process. And we have had different civic meetings, for example, in Nuuk, but I think we need to spread it out. So we need to make sure that it's not only these formal meetings, but it's also on social media and so on, because so much is happening, and I think it's important that people really feel that they have a say in what's going on in our own land.
I mean, inside of the Kingdom of Denmark, it is Denmark that has overall decision-making authority over defense and security and foreign policy, but the strategy seems like it drifts in that direction. Is that a trend you see as becoming more important, that there will be more local determination over foreign security and defense policy?
We've seen throughout the political history of Galashitinat that the case has been very often that because politicians of our nation inherently exercise self-determination, often the sort of legal framework only comes in place after the decisions are taken or after things have started happening. So really, when you look at Greenland's political history, it is very much driven by the interests of the people in terms of, for example, from the very first moment of home rule being introduced in 1979, a big issue that had been debated throughout the 70s was Greenland's relationship with the EU. And so very early after the establishment of Greenland's own parliament and government, the preparations were initiated for a referendum on the question of membership of the EU. It was called something else back then, but it led to then the referendum where Greenland chose to leave the EU. So very, very early on in Greenland's political history of having its own representative institutions in the forms of a government and a parliament, big issues that are related to foreign politics have been decided by the politicians in Kalaallit. So I think it's important to see that also in that view and understand that self-determination, of course, comes with a big responsibility. We are seeing that with the way that the politicians of the parliament in Kalaallit are debating and acting in these months, but also comes on the basis of an inherentness of that self-determination. And I think that's sometimes what can make it difficult for others to decipher who controls what, and especially in a state with the structure of the Kingdom of Denmark, where you have 3 nations that are each their nation, each have their own parliaments and governments, and also really trying to understand how within that structure are the different responsibilities delineated. And it's not been clear, and it cannot really be clear, because constantly there will be a push to exercise self-determination. And we've had examples, for example, of decisions taken that seemingly were, decisions that Greenland would not necessarily have to consider as security and defense issues, but they are. So, for example, building critical infrastructure or the question of possible mining and so forth. Those decisions are taken by the people of Kalaallit through their government and parliament. But yet they have implications that has made it necessary to also revisit how the structures within the kingdom actually work. And that's been a process that's been, to me, I think, a natural process. But I think it also has created some level of doubt, not least an opportunity or a space for someone to create doubt about who controls what. And I think that's an important aspect to remember in this current development.
But I also think, talking to people back home about the relationship between Greenland and Denmark, it is complicated. And also asking them, how do they see the relationship between Greenland and EU on the other side? And some people are saying that they see it more neutral. Of course, we have had different history, both with EU. We have had different history with the Americans during the World War II, for example. And I think it's just to say that, it's going to be very important for us to figure out exactly what are, we know our values, but also maybe to revisit our values and to be very clear on our values. And I think that Greenland has done an excellent job. And I think everybody that has represented Greenland has really done their utmost in order to make sure that, we're standing strong on our values, but also to figure out exactly who are our friends. And also when we talk about defense. And I think, just the whole NATO engagement and collaboration is, of course, something that is, people are also questioning what is going on, and is this the right path to go? And I still think it is, but I think it's also important to build up trust, especially with the Americans over time, because right now it's something that has been, up in the air. And I was also in the Danish Parliament in 2019 when we were in a similar situation, but it was just handled very different from the Americans. And therefore, I think we have a common task about strengthening defense, but we need to figure out exactly how do we do it and how do we get the engagement from the local people in Greenland as well.
I'm not sure if you can talk about what's going on right now with this working group process between Greenland, Denmark, and the United States in terms of the future resolution of this crisis? I'm not sure if that's something you can talk about publicly or...
Yeah, I think this is being dealt with behind closed doors, so I think we should respect that.
Okay.
But I do think that it's also important to remember that the defense agreement from 1951 is an agreement that has served both the US, Greenland, and Denmark. And I think that there's a general sentiment that there needs to be a strong collaboration with the US also in terms of defense. What is common to everyone in the Arctic is Arctic security. And how do we ensure that our region, that is not just an ice desert, it is not just an asset, it is not just a place to pick up resources, it is our home. And how do we ensure that the Arctic region remains and maintains a peaceful region? And for that to happen, there's a shared responsibility to talk about Arctic security. And there can be different ways of addressing security, especially given who are the Arctic states, including two great powers, and that rivalry that is going on in terms of that. And I think what people often forget is that we as Inuit and we as Arctic peoples have already experienced great power rivalry, and we've already sort of had that precondition in our later years of political development. So I'm talking about the establishment of self-government agreements and so forth. Much of what we have today was actually created during the Cold War, including the connections we have across state borders. So we also carry with us an experience of, walking the way, leading the way in making sure that the states can actually work together. And I think that's a very big responsibility we continue to carry as Arctic leaders, no matter if we are indigenous leaders, state leaders, or nation leaders. And therefore, I think keeping Arctic security in mind, whether then it's one kind of increased military presence or another kind of increased military presence or other means to ensure that we can live peacefully together, that is really something that each leader has to consider very carefully. And what can worry me a little bit right now is the speed of things. We've seen, for example, that just a few years ago, we would debate the role of NATO in the Arctic as opposed to in the North Atlantic. We would debate the role of NATO in sort of the Nordic part of the North Atlantic and the Greenland part of the North Atlantic. And those things are still valid to debate, even though things are moving very quickly. And that all falls back on the whole, careful consideration that needs to be taken for us to all ensure what everyone around the table in the Arctic have an interest in, and that is to maintain a peaceful region. And so that can concern me quite a lot at the moment, that some things are moving very quickly. And the same also we see in terms of the rhetorics around young people in our nation joining the military, for example. We've seen media narratives as if they are already now being educated into being soldiers. But there has not been a political decision for the population of the people of Galashitinat and our children and youth to actually go down that path in terms of a collective decision and a representative decision. So I think that we also have to be careful in terms of the speed of things and make sure that we are doing things wisely, even though it is a time under great pressure.
I think many of us understand and recognize that in better times we could talk about high north, low tension, and the situation is a little different today, and therefore it's also important to say that strengthening the defense is one thing, but also how can we do that with engaging the local community and the people there, and the Arctic basic education, for example, in Tromsø, in the middle of Greenland, is one of the maybe the greatest successes that we have seen in defense in Greenland. And I remember at one time I had this meeting and we had around 100 people coming there, and Sara was actually so kind to come as well. And it was quite interesting to see that young people were actually, interested in talking about defense and actually being actively involved in it, but not in a classic defense, where it was about capabilities and so on, but it was actually, making sure that the knowledge that they have to speak Greenlandic, having grown up in Greenland, going sailing, going hunting, and so on, was actually some of the competencies that I saw was quite important for the defense of our own country. And I think it's the balance, and I don't think we have the whole solution right now, but I think it's just, that's why I think it's so important to have the continued dialogue with the population on how should we do this, because this is, just a few years ago, it was kind of like a blank page that was our defense history. And therefore, how can we do it in a manner where we really feel like this is the right path that we would like to see, instead of something that is happening, above our heads, which we have seen for many, many years. And I think that's still a process. Whether it's, the Defenders of Greenland, for example, which is a new project that is also being discussed, whether it's the Rangers of Greenlanders and so on. There's many different ways of going about this. But, if you don't have the support from the people, then it won't be a success. And I just think that's important.
And how are young people looking at the future of Greenland in terms of the economic basis of society? I mean, that's been very much in focus during this crisis as well, in terms of whether it's going to be mining rare earths and critical minerals and so forth. Do Greenlanders, young people in particular, look at that as an attractive future, to make it an economy based upon exploitation of natural resources? I mean, it's been to this point very much based on export of seafood. Do they see this as an important inflection point in deciding one future over another?
I think it's not so much about deciding one future over another. As indigenous peoples, especially of the Arctic, we are very used to adapting. And the specialized skills that Inuit have to survive and thrive in the Arctic are still there. And on top of that, our societies across our homelands have developed a wide range of different business areas, been skillful traders, been skillful at meeting other peoples, actually been very globalized in the way that we live and engage with other peoples, also going back in time from the early meetings with European whalers and so forth. And also in between other indigenous peoples before colonization occurred. So I think it's important to not sort of dichotomize one or the other development. Those things go hand in hand, and I think it's a deep part of our DNA as Inuit to develop our societies, to develop the resources we have, to utilize them for different ways to enrich our communities, no matter if this was 1,000 years ago or if it's today. What I do note is that we have, compared to many other indigenous peoples around the world, we've had opportunities to establish self-government arrangements in different forms across our nations, both in Alaska, Canada, and in Galashinunaat, and within each also in different ways, for example, in Alaska and Canada, and a whole fourth other way in Chukotka. And that means that there's actively been decisions taken, and that also goes for Galashinunaat. So if we compare it to indigenous people's decision-making processes, many other places in the world, proactively Inuit in Galashinunaat, through the government that represents the whole people of the nation, decide, for example, to not do uranium mining, not do offshore oil exploration, but do other kinds of mineral development and other kinds of energy development. So there has been opened eyes in terms of taking decisions in what our people believes is the best for the people, based on democratic institutions and decision-making processes that are democratic. So we can always discuss, and we do that continuously, if they are all very sound and strong, these decision-making processes. But I do take note that we have had strong debates and decision-making processes to determine a relatively broad consensus around what the business and economic development of our nation should look like. And that is reflected across other Inuit nations as well, to take active decision and proactively develop your own societies in the way that you see is necessary and fits your own people. And that sometimes, I think, by the media attention we've seen in the past month especially, which I think was more than we saw last year and more than we saw in 2019. I've seen that the mainstream media, especially international media, sometimes portray us a little bit as if we've been passive spectators to what's happening. And I want to say that it's the opposite. As a people, the people of Greenland has really pursued many things proactively, including establishing, diplomatic ties to many nations, including the US. And therefore, we are not passive spectators to what's happening. And I think that's also what we're seeing now with the negotiations taking place with, all three governments in the room. And of course, we have yet to see how those negotiations will what they will result in. But it's even here, I've heard for some it comes as a surprise that Greenland is even in that negotiating room. And so I think that's really important to remind everyone that proactive inherentness in exercising self-determination is something that really lies deeply in our way of thinking as Inuit and as Arctic peoples. And I think that's something that the world should also be more responsive to in the way that the situation is being portrayed.
I think many of us agree that we need to diversify our economy, whether it's minerals, whether it's tourism, which is also very high on the agenda in Greenland, but also making sure that we have the frames right. So that's why I think business development is so important. But I also want to bring in the human dimension that Sara is also mentioning. And I'm a parent. I have 4 kids, and for me it's so important. And I really understand that making sure that you have local jobs, but also that you have local educational opportunities is something that any parent would like to have for their kids. And therefore, I think that is what we should focus on making sure that we get the kind of jobs that we need, and this is something that the local people is actually being a part of instead of something that is happening. We have seen, whether it's research, whether it's mineral, whether it's any kind of business, we have seen so much fly in, fly out over time, and for me it's just important that we really make sure that this is something that is creating local opportunities, and also as a self-reflection on what I'm doing politically, to make sure that we're actually getting better at making sure that this is creating local engagement and local opportunities, instead of something that is, for example, completely a Danish authority, for example, in Greenland. It should really be something that is creating opportunities and respect for the local people and the competencies that they're bringing.
Sara, you mentioned that many are surprised that Greenland is in the room for some of these very high-level negotiations, the highest possible level of negotiations. Do you think there's been any benefits to this crisis for Greenland, despite the extreme pressure and the stress that it's caused for your leaders and your population? Is improving its standing inside of the Kingdom of Denmark?
I definitely think that things have been thrown a little bit up in the air, and there's been a need to sort of view things in a new perspective. But I do also want to say that one thing that we have reacted against from the Inuit Circumpolar Council is the way in which former colonization has been used in a propagandistic way against us. And I think that's something that many people immediately rejected. And again, that's back to the saying and what we've repeated about there not being a better colonizer. And I think really that is something that many people saw through from the very first day. And I think a lot of us, and also the systems of both Greenland and Denmark, recognize the necessity of having a conversation, and more than a conversation, a process around addressing the legacies and trauma that comes from colonization. And that process has been there irrespectively of what the US has done. So yes, maybe within that process already existing, there might have been things thrown up in the air that needed to be addressed in maybe a different speed or in a different way. But the underlying sort of process of addressing the historic relationship between Greenland and Denmark was already a process that was established and decided upon between the two governments, which is necessary. What I do think, and we touched upon that just a moment ago, is that the change that we are seeing in that, which is represented through the rhetoric and the worldview coming out of the way that our nation has been addressed or spoken about, really represents what, for example, the Canadian Prime Minister has called a rupture in the world order. And I think many of us knew that, low tension and the talks about maintaining a world order may not be where we are. But exactly for that reason, we have to make sure that we establish and protect the cooperation we have in the Arctic. It is exactly because of that rupture and that change in the world order that we have to be very careful about how we bring ways to perceive addressing high tension in our region. And also be very adamant, and I think that's where the voices coming out of Kalaallit Nunaat have been so important, and which have been given more space in media in the past month especially. Seeing things from the inside of the Arctic, and how do we navigate this change, which is broader than what is happening in Kalaallit Nunaat and what is happening towards Kalaallit Nunaat from the US. It represents something bigger and broader. And how do we then address that while making sure that in our region we have a cooperation that can uphold a peaceful region as we have known it. And I think that it's important to not jump on the wagon of doing things the way that you would traditionally do it from a sort of European point of view or US point of view, and try and be the voice that creates a path for a way of doing it in the Arctic that fits the Arctic. Because that's also how we've been able to deal with prior conflicts and increased tension. So I think that a little bit contrary to what Aaja is saying, that it's exactly because of the rupture, exactly because of the increased tension, that we have to be much more careful around how we exactly deal with those questions in our Arctic reality.
But, I think one dimension which I think is quite important to bring to the table is also that, the history between Greenland and Denmark is quite complex. It really is. And we're also seeing, still some of the consequences. The IUD case is something that we're discussing, finding solutions for that and so on. The reconciliation process, I think we haven't talked enough about that. But I think the whole situation has really been something that has reactivated the trauma that many people are feeling in Greenland. And I think it hasn't gotten enough media attention that I think we also need to look into the aftermath of the whole pressure that we have felt from the US side, and also that we need to look into solutions. So, I'm open for discussions. I'm open for different opinions on this. I think it's healthy for a democracy to have different opinions on this issue. And, for me, it's, I'm standing on the same policy as I've done for the whole time, and that is to make sure that, we focus on the facts. What I'm seeing from the US side is they're usually twisting the facts in order to say something about us, to do a narrative about Greenland, and that is why you should choose us. And I really don't like that, because I think it's important that they respect the people, they respect the facts, and also, as Sara was saying, it's our home. It's we have Greenlanders in Denmark, which it's also a big group that we need to be aware about. And they still feel the connection to the Greenlandic society as well. So, making sure that we make the Greenlandic society as robust and that we also listen to different aspects on what needs to be done. I think that's important, keeping an open mind, but also keeping a special eye on the solution, because, the easiest thing in the world is to point fingers. it's so easy for us as human beings. But it's always an obligation for me every time I talk about a challenge to always talk about what is the solution, because sometimes I can feel that Greenland is Denmark for Greenland is waiting for Denmark, Denmark is waiting for Greenland in order to make sure what is the solution in this specific manner. But I think it is especially us who knows how things are that needs to give the solutions. And of course you can have different opinions on this matter. But I think that is, we've seen a tenfold of results just the last year. We've seen much more spent on defense, much more spent on justice system and so on. Do we still have challenges? Definitely. Do we still need to do more? Of course. Do Denmark need to do more? Without a doubt. And so on. So it's about finding solutions and being constructive, but also very proactive, because I think it's a marathon, not a short sprint. And we've been running almost since 2019, and sometimes it's very fast. And I like the comment that Sara was making about the speed, because sometimes when the speed is too high, you make unnecessarily mistakes. And that's why, we need to make sure that especially the government, but also the people feel that this is not too fast, and the solutions are something that we can see is good for us as a society.
I mean, the marathon, if we use a metaphor, since 1979 or 2009 has been an eventual independent Greenland. But in the context of this current crisis, I mean, your Prime Minister has said, we choose Denmark over the United States in this moment. Where does that put the long-term ambitions of Greenlandic independence?
It puts it aside for a moment, but I think it's important to say that independence is a long-term goal, and I think it's the right thing to do in time. But as in better times we could talk about low tension, in better times it was something that we could discuss even more. And I think, and I think we agree upon this, that the quality of the solution needs to be better. I think a quick fix towards an independence is dangerous, to be honest. So I think that is, looking more into a more qualified answer in order to make sure that, we're standing as strong as possible. And I think that's why, education for our young people, business development, no matter the pace of how and when we will be independent, because I also think there's 15 different definitions on being independent, and I think we need to have that discussion as well, instead of just jumping to the first quick fix on how to have the biggest say in our own matters. I really support the fact that Greenland takes more responsibility. I really support that we stand much more on our own terms, because I think that's the right thing to do. And I think, just the fact that Denmark, 3,000 kilometers away from Greenland, is making decisions on around 30 areas, it doesn't make sense. And I think even my Danish colleagues understand that to some extent, that of course they also need to listen to the people. And that's why, every time we have a decision, we need to make sure that the Parliament of Greenland has a say first. Otherwise we can't deal with this legislation proposal, for example.
Yes, I think that again we are back to the inherentness of self-determination and the aspiration of being self-determining in all aspects of your own future as a people. So that's what it comes down to, and that's something I think the people of Greenland shares with so many other peoples of the world. And the basic development, or the thing we have to watch in this development, and we are back to the changing world order and the rupture, is how are the states around us going to act, and how are they going to position themselves in terms of upholding international law and rules-based order? How are they going to position themselves in terms of territorial integrity? How are they going to position themselves in terms of recognizing that peoples, no matter how many we are in each people, are equal to all peoples, and also human rights, and especially the rights of indigenous peoples? And I think those are the values that the Galashlidnat nation stands on and has been very clear in communicating. those states who have expressed their support for that stand on those values as well. And we are seeing, therefore, a clearer picture in terms of how the middle powers, the smaller powers, are positioning themselves. And that's something I think that will determine the future of the development of independence or self-determination in the shorter run. But hopefully in the longer run, we will see a full respect for the integrity of the people of Greenland, being able to exercise self-determination and have that self-determination recognized in the form that the people wishes to do it. But right now, what we are looking at and we are keeping our eye on also from the Inuit Circumpolar Council, from which all of our vice chairs have just recently issued a statement, all upholding and calling for the upholding international rules-based order and the right of self-determination. So I think these are values we share across state borders with so many indigenous peoples from all over the world. We have been receiving statements of support from so many different peoples, from the Amazon, from other Arctic peoples, from peoples in North America, from the Sami, and they are all standing shoulder by shoulder based on those values in terms of respect of self-determination and the issues that the government of Greenland has also made clear. So I think we are seeing now a development of how we globally also have communities and based on shared values. And we have yet to see how that all develops and how that interplay with those bigger states that might stand on other values will develop. And therefore, I think for the same reason, it is extremely important that we are careful not to just use an automatic gear, but that we are actually managing and navigating this reality in a way that is responsive to the exact situation of our people in Greenland, but also on a broader scale, the development in the Arctic, which is changing, but still has everyone around the table. For example, in the Arctic Council, every state is still there. Every indigenous peoples organization as a permanent participant is still there. And that in itself is also showing that when it comes to the Arctic, we have a determined will to work together. And that's what we also need to protect.
And just the slogan, Galallit Nunat, Galallibiat, and just the fact that, Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders and also the right to self-determination. It's both the indigenous, but it's also the states. And I think, I'm so happy and being in politics for more than a decade, it's just a real pleasure to see that the states are really recognizing that Greenland belongs to us and the future is completely up to us and no one questions that anymore. So I think that's actually one of the greatest successes that we have seen in this whole process, which has been, it's been extraordinary pressure that has been put on the Greenlandic people. But I think it's a good outcome. So I think it's one of the untold story, to be honest, that it's a good thing.
Sara, you brought up the Arctic Council. I'm glad you did. That was my next question, actually. I know we're running out of time here. You're both very busy, but I'd like to talk about the current chairship, which is the Kingdom of Denmark with Greenland in the lead. Has all this crisis situation with the United States and Greenland, has that derailed Arctic Council work under your chairship? Has that prevented or delayed your trying to achieve some of the goals as chair of the Arctic Council? Or is it business as usual, besides, of course, all the other challenges that originate from 2022 with the Ukraine invasion? How is the current state of affairs in the Arctic Council?
Well, if you want to study in detail the changes, you can read the documents coming out of the Arctic Council ministerial meetings prior to 2022, after 2022 Arctic Council meetings with no ministers around the table, or very few. In 23 and 25, there were statements done that were decided upon by consensus among the 8 states and the 6 permanent participants. And we, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, is one of the permanent participants and also a co-founder of the Arctic Council. So to understand some of the changes that have occurred, both after 2022, but also now with the US, they can be seen throughout those documents. But what I do want to say is that the Kingdom of Denmark is doing a wonderful job in chairing, and we have really welcomed the way that they have gone about chairing the Arctic Council from Inuit Circumpolar Council. And we see also how necessary it is to continue having the indigenous peoples meet. The Arctic Council does not meet on a political level with representatives from the states, but we as indigenous peoples have now met, and I can't even count how many times until now, because during the Norwegian chairship, prior to the Kingdom of Denmark's chairship, we started this new format of having the senior Arctic officials chair meeting with all the permanent participants. So a political meeting with the chairship and the indigenous peoples organizations, gathering to strategize around how to continue the work in the Arctic Council, gathering to have a dialogue about some of the modalities and practicalities, making sure that there's a prioritization of the different projects that go on under the 6 working groups, which are really the machinery and the backbone of the Arctic Council. And that has also made a situation or created a situation where we suddenly have the indigenous peoples around the table meeting more actively, so to speak, in a circumpolar manner than you would see the states at the moment. And I think we all understand that the states, with their senior Arctic officials and ministers, will most likely not anytime soon meet in person. But the fact that they are all still part of the Arctic Council and that decision-making continues, although in a written procedure format, really shows that each state and each permanent participant values very highly that we have the Arctic Council, that we have that room for cooperation, that we've managed to navigate through really difficult waters together, and that we've managed also to maintaining it alive and kicking. I think that's the wording that the SAU chair, the Arctic ambassador of the Kingdom of Denmark has used. The other thing is, of course, that the symbolism around that it's the government of Greenland taking the lead within the kingdom is a strong symbolism in the sense that when the Arctic Council started in the 1990s, well, then it was actually also the government of Greenland that was there at the table signing the Ottawa Declaration on behalf of the kingdom. But there's been a moment throughout those, or a time throughout those 30 years of the Arctic Council's existence, where the states have brought it to a higher level within the states, and where there has been a little bit of a sort of change in the access for the peoples of the Arctic to be fully represented. That said, the unique structure of the Arctic Council is really something that I know that many other peoples of the world are looking to, that you have states and indigenous peoples taking decisions based on consensus in an intergovernmental and international body and a regional body. So that's something that I think everyone around the table are sharing, the political will around protecting and maintaining and building upon. But I have seen that there's been a development that has put indigenous peoples, at the center again. And I think that that's also necessary to ensure that the Arctic Council is responsive to exactly the issues that are important for us who are living in the Arctic.
I agree with what Sara is saying, and at the same time, because also being a politician and trying to push the government of Denmark, and I think Denmark should have put aside more money in order to make sure, for example, youth engagement was something that we could take some initiatives on. I know that ICC is doing a great job when it comes to Inuit women leadership, for example. I think you could do that overall when it comes to indigenous women leadership and so on. So I think there's different themes that could have been maybe highlighted even more to a broader audience. So I think, having the Greenlandic leadership and having the good dialogue, and I think the Arctic Council is so important, and we need to support that. But I think that's also the reason why it's okay to say, okay, I would like to see even more coming out of the Arctic Council chairship. I know it's a difficult situation also with the war in Ukraine and things has been paused, and now it's in this situation. So I know that people are doing what they can, but for me it's also about pushing in order to make sure that we have a shared high standard for the work that the Arctic Council should do. And in this situation, I think it could be dealt with in different manners, because I think the youth engagement, the indigenous women engagement, and also just making sure that you have the strong voices from the Arctic is very important to highlight even more.
The one thing that is really unique around the Arctic Council is its consensus-based decision making. And to answer the question you asked, yes, there's been challenges in the past year as well. But I think that everyone who have a head of delegation role, or who are the knowledge producers in each of the working groups, be they scientists or indigenous peoples, knowledge holders, are working towards, with the team spirit of collaborative work, and making sure that we can continue to be in dialogue about the many different things. But it also is a consensus-based body, and therefore it has, yes, become more difficult to have some themes approved by consensus. But that said, much of the work is ongoing, and it continues, and the so-called pause that was initiated by the 7 states luckily did not result in the Arctic Council breaking down. So we were able to pick up on where everything had been left, and rebuild something collectively with the states and the permanent participants in a collective effort, rebuild something that now also stands on a relatively strong foundation. But hopefully we will see that political will from all states to continue, and also we will hopefully see that each state will take some time to consider what is exactly the reason why we have the Arctic Council. What are the things that this council can do on the basis of its unique structure, and build further on that in the years to come.
Well, it's been a fascinating discussion. I'd like to just ask perhaps one last question about what lessons have the two of you learned in this past year, dealing with such enormous pressure and global spotlight being on you, and what hopes do you have for the near future, or the long-term future as well?
I would say what I have learned is thinking short-term instead of thinking strategically and long-term, and doing both, because I think we should also do both. So it's really thinking into solutions quickly, and the hope that I have for the future is, I'm actually quite hopeful, and it might not make sense in this situation, but I think the Greenlandic people have been standing strong on this issue, and I think we should just keep doing that good job, and of course we can have collaboration on strengthening defense in the Arctic, for example, but therefore I think it's important for us to be as proactive and always to think of solutions.
Yeah, and I think especially the necessity and importance of bringing the voices of the people to the broader global audience. There's been so many narratives about us which have been seen from the inside, false narratives. For example, the narrative that has been reproduced time and time again is that Denmark could actually sell Greenland, or that we wouldn't have a say in such a, in our own future. And I think it's one good thing that's come out of all of this is, of course, all the voices who have been in different international media, and also indigenous media picking up and calling us and asking for in-depth interviews to fully understand what is the arrangements we have in this construction that we call the Kingdom of Denmark, with 3 different nations and their own parliaments and governments. So that's one positive thing, but really the lesson is, I hope, a lesson that everyone is taking to them, be they CNN or CBC or whoever news broadcast media that are out there, to really also ensure that you represent and also have the voice of the people that it's about in your reporting. I think that has been a turning point this time around, to see the massive attention and the massive number of media being in Nuuk. They are literally on each corner of the town with a camera and a microphone, and everyone from old to young have spoken to someone from very far away in this world who have come to hear our story. And I think that's really been an important aspect and a lesson that we should all take with us.
It's almost an industry in itself to have all the kind of journalists. So, it's very difficult to even find a hotel room in Greenland because of the whole attention that Greenland is getting.
Well, I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to speak to the two of you here in Tromsø, Norway at the Arctic Frontiers Conference. Thank you very much, Sara Olsvig and Aaja Chemnitz, for joining me here on the Polar Geopolitics podcast. Fantastic discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.